Hi everyone, it's Natalie again. Today I want to talk about something that I'm particularly fond of, which is sport, and specifically transgender people's access to playing sport. So this is something that's particularly close to me because I play quite a lot of sport. I usually have played quite a lot of sport in the past, and obviously things have got a lot more, well, a bit more difficult in that area now. But also, the participation side is really important to me because there's been lots of times, in transition and before transition and so on, that have been quite difficult, and I've kind of got through a lot of them through sport. So that for me, that's really mainly playing football and running. So there's been lots of times when I've felt terrible, really depressed. You go out for a run and you kind of forget it all. And I know that other trans people have said similar things. So I think it's not everybody loves sport, but I think it's a really good way that a lot of us kind of get through difficult times. And of course, there's the medical side as well. For trans women, for example, often when you go on to hormone replacement therapy when you transition, it can be quite difficult to stay fit and to lose weight and so on. And with the way the NHS works in this country, to get your access to certain surgeries, you have to be below a certain BMI, which is controversial, but certainly sport and exercise is key in being able to do that. And it's well documented that sport has mental health benefits, and exercise does as well. So it's something that it's really important that we're all able to do. And let's be perfectly honest here. There's no reason why playing sport should be any more difficult for trans people than it should be for cis people. It's if we're going to have an equal society, then we should all have the same access. And sadly, that very much isn't the case right now. So sport has been in the public eye a little bit more through the trans lens anyway recently, because the IOC recently made a decision to change their policy for inclusion of transgender people in the Olympics, which I won't go into the details of the sort of what they've changed, but it is now a much better policy and easier for trans people to compete in the Olympics. Now obviously the Olympics is a flagship sporting event, so hopefully that will trickle down into the other sports. But that hasn't always been the case in the past, and I'm not sure whether it will be the case now. But before I go into that, I'll talk a little bit about my background in sport and how I've got to where I am now. So I used to play football when I was younger, and up until transition I was playing men's Sunday league football. And when I say football, for any Americans watching, I'm talking about our English football that you might call soccer. Definitely don't play American football. I got into playing football, I suppose, fairly late actually, so I was in my teens, and it was something, early teens, and it was something I actually, to be honest, can see now looking back, I got into as a kind of a man up exercise, which obviously went really well, and it's I wasn't particularly great at it, but I worked hard at it because I wanted to fit in, and I was okay at football, and got into sort of, I carried on playing football into my 20s, and sort of started playing with a local team again in my early 20s, which is the kind of stage a lot of people drop out, which is a shame, but that's always how it's been. And it's one of these things that when you play with a team, you have this sort of good social side to things and so on, which is great to help you kind of fit in. Now, when I started to transition, I thought that was all going to have to stop, because at the time, the sort of FA policies around trans women playing football was that you had to be at least 2 years post GRS, and I knew that it was going to take me probably at least 3 or 4 years to get to the stage of having GRS, so I was looking at potentially 6-7 years maybe of not being able to play football, which when you're kind of 30, 29, 30 seems quite career ending. So I thought that was the end of that, but then actually, so I stopped playing the end of the season before I started transition, and had a season off, and then at the end of that second season, that first season off, I kind of thought, I've quite missed this and I want to get back into it. So I went and found a local team, emailed them, and they said, "I'm trans. Is it cool if I come along?" And they were fine. So I turned up, and I mean, I'm not going to underestimate this. That was quite scary. So when you go along to any sort of, and obviously this being a women's team, when you go along to any sort of women's only space when you're trans, it's pretty scary for the first time, because you don't know how people are going to react. Obviously when you play sport, you typically don't have, you don't wear, well, I didn't wear any makeup or anything like that, so you feel quite exposed because it's just what you normally look like, and that's quite frightening. It was actually the day after I'd had laser as well, so I looked pretty awful. But anyway, it was fine, and people were very accepting, and that was good. There were lots of things I had to get over in my own head that were probably preventing me from participating properly as well, because it's drummed into you that you've got this massive physical advantage as a trans woman playing with cis women, which is not true. I then sort of looked into what the FA policies around trans women playing football were, and at this point I knew they had changed in that interim period between when I first looked and where I was then. And we're talking about July 2015 now, so going back nearly a year. And so the policy was that trans women could play football with cis women, but you had to, and here's the interesting part, the policy said you have to be in a natal female hormonal range for an appropriate length of time. Now, I don't know what appropriate length of time means, and in fact a natal female hormonal range is quite different depending on who you ask. So for example, I know that for the last few years, sort of the IAAF and various other bodies have used, for cis women anyway, a maximum testosterone range of up to 10 nanomoles per litre of testosterone in the blood, which has ruled out some cis women from competing in sports. So you'll probably be familiar with the cases of Dutty Chand and Caster Semenya and so on, who have had long-running battles with sports governing bodies about being able to compete, and they've come to varying different conclusions. But so I thought maybe they'll be using that range. Of course, I was well within that range, so I thought that would be fine. But it turns out they weren't using that range. I applied in July to the FA to get permission to play football, and they said, well, after various delays and confusions and so on, they came back in around October 2015 and said that no, you can't play because your testosterone level is too high. But of course they wouldn't tell me what too high meant, how much too high was it. So I was due a change of medication anyway, so I had that. Had another blood test in January and reapplied. And at this point they said, yes, your testosterone level's fine now, just needs to be there for another year. So I'm left in the situation at the moment that I can't play until December, January, end of this year, which is a full kind of 2 years after I'd started hormones. But speaking to other trans women who've been through this process, it doesn't seem like they've had it quite as difficult. So I think the process could do with some clarification on, well, I mean, clearly what is the hormone level that we're working to, and how long is the acceptable period of time. Anyway, this brings me on to my wider point, which is about the attitudes around including trans people in sport. Now, most sports governing bodies have some sort of trans inclusion policy, but actually in a lot of cases it's much more of a trans exclusion policy, because it's rules around stopping us playing rather than rules around how to make sure that we can participate. And some of them are draconian. I mean, like I touched on before, the FA's old policy used to be that you had to be, for a trans woman, 2 years post GRS, which, if you're familiar with the waiting lists in the UK for this sort of thing, people could be looking at 8 years potentially, during which presumably you're allowed to, as a trans woman, to play men's football. But I don't know if anyone has ever tried playing men's Sunday League football on a kind of an army pitch in Aldershot with, like, looking like this. I think bad things would happen, so I wasn't really keen to try that. Now, a lot of these attitudes around stopping trans people playing sport seems to be coming from this fairly bizarre belief that if you allow trans women to play with cis women, then this sea of cis men are going to go, do you know what, actually no, I'm a woman and I'm going to go and compete with them because it's easier to win. And where does this come from? I mean, I'm not aware of any evidence of this ever actually having happened. And anyone who knows anything about women's sports knows that the rewards in women's sport are quite ludicrously much less than they are in men's sport. So you're not going to get some disgruntled League One men's footballer go, do you know what, I'm just going to go and play women's football instead and I'll reap great rewards. Because even an average conference footballer, which is about sort of, for those who don't know, it's kind of tier 5 of the men's football leagues, is probably going to be a professional earning more than what England international women's footballers do. So you're going to have to fancy yourself to be pretty good to be able to just walk straight into a women's team, and even then you're probably going to earn a lot less money than you did pootling around in the lower divisions in men's football. So I don't think people are going to do that. I don't know as much about other sports, but it seems unlikely that that's quite as easy to do in any other sport as well. So I don't think that's a likelihood. The advantages I might have in women's football is I'm quite tall, so I'm 6'1", and I've said that before, things like my stride length is quite long. But why is that advantage unfair if I have it, but if a cis woman has it, it's not unfair? Because there are cis women who are 6'1" playing football up and down the country every week, and nobody says to them, well, you've got too much of an advantage, so you have to go and play with the men. I wonder what would happen if somebody tried that. The whole argument around trans people in sport is littered with these ludicrous scare stories that there doesn't really seem to be any real evidence that it happens. So as a kind of a closing thought, I would say to all trans people out there, if you want to go and play sport, then go and do it. I've found it really great to do that. It really has helped me in so many different ways, both mentally and physically, and it helps you feel kind of accepted. If you're involved in the administration of sport in some way, then please find a way of helping trans people participate in your sport and don't be a barrier, because there is almost certainly a trans person out there who wants to play your sport, and at the moment they probably feel like they can't. It can literally make so much difference to people if they're able to participate in these activities, and it has great mental health and physical health benefits, which ultimately can probably save some lives. I'll put a bit more detail about what I've talked about in the description, because there's no way I could cover everything I wanted to talk about in this video, and if you want to ask some questions, then please do. But thanks for listening. Bye.